It's one of the most iconic dungeons in Norath, full of crocodiles, gargoyles, but more importantly, lots of froglocks, both alive and dead. Not to mention some of the best loot in classic EverQuest. We're in the zone with the original developer of Upper and Lower Guk. And just how many different games are there in the EverQuest universe? I bet it's a lot more than you think in this episode of the EverQuest Show.
Not even close to the end, it's just beginning. Life is getting lighter while the days are getting brighter, yeah. Celebrate life and get excited about good times and good living. Come on, shout it out. Hey! Take it up, take it over, take it out of control. Today I'm bringing my soul and now you got me singing. Oh, hey!
Welcome to the EverQuest Show, episode 14. I'm Fading here in the EverQuest Show studios. And the EverQuest franchise all began with the original game. It's 50 levels and 3 continents. Over 2.5 decades, the world of Norath has expanded. Not just the incomparable 29 expansions of the original game, but the surprising number of other EverQuest games in the franchise. But before we get to those, during the pandemic, I had the chance to chat with Jeffrey Zatkin. He's one of the original developers and game designers for EverQuest. He's responsible for one of the original and most iconic dungeons in all of EverQuest.
So I initially got hired as a level designer because that's what they were looking for, though we were called world builders. I always like to say I was guy 5 or 6 or 7 on the EQ team. So I designed Guk, Upper and Lower as my first dungeons, and then the gnome city of Akanon. We had such a small team that for Guk, Bill Troust had kind of the idea, it was the Froglock dungeon. He gave me a base concept and it was go start building. I'd been playing D&D for so long, then it's a dungeon. Okay, I'm gonna go build a dungeon. I can't tell you how many dungeon maps I'd drawn for going through. And so one of the reasons it feels like, it is a dungeon is I was going in to build a dungeon with years of D&D, 15 years of D&D experience or something at that point. I hadn't quite realized how slimy and gucky it was going to be. You lay out the design, but then the textures come in later. What is it? You're laying out the geometry and then the textures, what does each wall look like? You've built the wall, but what do you put on the picture? So the first time Bill put those on, I was like, He and I had a couple words on it and he's like, well, this is how it's going to be. And I kept building on that and I was like, oh, okay. But if you think about Guk, there were very few types of creatures. And one of the reasons Upper Guk and Lower Guk existed was the zone got too big and we had to chop it in half so we could fit in. But those were all technical limitations that we built around. A lot of the choices for EverQuest 1 were made based on hardware, computer hardware of the time, update speed at the time. How much could we fit in a zone? How big could the textures be? One of the reasons you could only have 4 or 5 types of monsters in a zone was that was the texture memory limit. Which is, you couldn't have 15 types of monsters show up. So we would, get really creative and resize them and give them different weapons or, slightly different, things. One of the great things about the team was, again, we were so small. It was like, go build a cool dungeon. Okay, I will go build a cool dungeon.
You'll be hearing a lot more from Jeffrey Zatkin, along with several other past and present EverQuest developers in the coming episodes to tell the story of how the EverQuest franchise was born and grew.
There'll be no game like that ever again, or game launch like that.
I convinced Bill and Brad I could make a class that had nothing to do with damage. And they weren't terribly certain about that.
In the present state of the franchise, EverQuest and EverQuest II get the lion's share of the attention. They're the only active EverQuest MMOs. But how many games are there in the total EverQuest universe? Think you know? 4? 7? Would you be surprised to hear 14? So how did I get to that number? So let's count up all of the games in the EverQuest franchise. The EverQuest universe started, of course, with the original game, which had been in development since 1997. After years of world building and overcoming incredible technical challenges and courageous decisions requiring ambitious computer requirements, EverQuest launched on March 16, 1999, and the EverQuest franchise was born.
It is the land of EverQuest.
It took over 3 years before the next installment of EverQuest was released. Most resources were spent developing expansions for EQ, but development was already underway for a myriad of different games, all on different platforms. Believe it or not, the second game in the franchise was a mobile game. EverQuest for the Pocket PC was launched in November of 2002. Pocket PC was the operating system available on various PDAs and palm-sized organizers and cell phones, and the game was a single-player role-playing game, set in Norath and featured Freeport, Neriak, Desert of Ro, and more. The game was one of the more impressive and content-rich games in the Pocket PC library, leading to the release of 2 sequels, Attack on Kinos and War on Phaedor. Both were released in early 2003. And while I do count these as individual games, it's difficult to distinguish whether these are mere expansions or full sequels to the original. It also may come as a surprise that the third game released in the EverQuest franchise was also a mobile game, this time for the budding early cell phone business and Brew mobile operating system. Heroes Call was launched in January of 2003. Get it? Heroes Call for a cell phone. I can find very little information about this game, and other than a few screenshots and press releases, I've never actually seen gameplay footage. So if any of you have footage or information or emulation of it, please reach out to the EverQuest Show. I'd love to fill in the blanks. But the game apparently did well enough to warrant a sequel. Just over a year later, Heroes Call 2 was released on the same platform. Starting in 2003, we begin seeing the heavy hitters in the EverQuest franchise emerge.
It's time to slay the dragon. About time. Anyone else on?
Early in 2003, the second EverQuest MMO is released, this time to a PlayStation audience. EverQuest Online Adventures brought the world of Norath to a console audience for the first time. The game took place on Tuneria, which is Antonica 500 years earlier than EverQuest's original timeline. So in essence, EQOA is a prequel. The success of EQOA led to a single expansion called Frontiers, and the game was live for just shy of a decade before being sunset in 2012. The game has an enthusiastic and loyal following even 10 years after its shutdown. In late 2003, the only real-time strategy installment in the franchise was launched for PC.
Welcome to Lords of EverQuest.
Set in Norath 10,000 years before EQ1, it features plenty of familiar races, and it still stands up to this day. If you missed our full review of Lords of EverQuest from episode 4 of the EverQuest Show, be sure to check that out, including the impressive actors and talent that lended their voices to NPCs in the game.
Go to Impulse. I said Impulse.
The world of Norath was quickly expanding, and 2004 was probably one of the most significant years in the franchise. In February of 2004, Champions of Norath was released for the PlayStation 2, and the second game in the franchise for that console. This time as a single-player action RPG hack-and-slash style game, it was a popular game for the PS2 and received good reviews. Beginning in Kelethin and making your way through Norath and even some of the plains, the game was set roughly 300 years before EverQuest 1, that's 200 years after EQOA for those keeping track. You receive visions from Firiona and even battle a very different-looking Inaruk.
Your soul is mine.
Champions of Norath is still playable for the PS2 or emulators. One of the most significant paradigm shifts in the EverQuest franchise occurred in November of 2004.
EverQuest II, where adventure comes alive.
This is undoubtedly the most successful game outside of the original, approaching its 20th year in the Norath of the future. Over on PlayStation 2, Champions of Norath was such a success that a sequel, Champions of Norath Return to Arms, was released just shy of a year after the original in early 2005. It refined the action RPG style only slightly and added a few minor changes to the original. Now, while it was not as well received, it still managed to hold its own. After 2005, the future of the franchise fell nearly silent. There was no development touted for new games, but expansions for EQ and EQ2 continue to be developed at a frenzied rate. And not one, not two, but 3 active MMOs were currently live, all about EverQuest. Finally, in 2007, a new addition to the world of Norath, but this time in the form of the ever-increasingly popular collectible trading card game scene. Legends of Norath was released in September of 2007, initially as a game played only inside EQ and EQ2, but it eventually received its own standalone client. received a lot of love from the loyal but few who actually played it. For most, it was an early form of loot boxes, with most opening card packs just to receive the in-game loot for EQ and EQ2. So whether you loved it or never played it, Legends of Norrath is the final fully released independent game in the EverQuest franchise, and its contribution to the artwork of Norrath is invaluable. Then things went really quiet. EQ and EQ2 expansions continued, but something else was brewing. And for many years, there was talk of EverQuest III. According to John Smedley himself, at least 3, possibly more, early attempts to make EverQuest III were scrapped and started over from scratch.
It's been remade. This is the 3rd remake of the game. You guys actually, those of you that were here that year, actually got to see the #2 remake. You didn't even get to see the first one.
Finally, in 2013, the news that we had all been waiting for. EverQuest Next was announced. And not just the next generation MMO set in Norrath, but a very different Norrath, and we were going to help build it through a better-than-Minecraft style world-building game called Landmark, the final 2 game additions on our list. Okay, look, a lot of people ask me why I don't dive into more of what happened in EverQuest Next. Trust me, no one was more excited at the announcement and the development process. I was at SOE Live when that amazing theme music written by Jeremy Soule was played in a fan-filled auditorium. I was actually holding back tears that the franchise that I love was having new life breathed into it. It was ambitious and different, but unfortunately it was never meant to be. In 2016, the development was canceled, and the head-scratching reason being, it wasn't fun. Now, there were plenty of emotions and tough questions surrounding what happened. Many of us were angry, disappointed, and trust had been eroded. Were we duped, or was it just part of the natural development process? Big games get canceled all the time. And perhaps one day I'll be willing and able to tell the story of what happened with EverQuest Next, but I prefer to still think about it as part of the world of Norrath, with its own set of lore, beautiful imagery, and concept art. Kind of a multiverse of Norraths with strange but exciting differences. Unfortunately, it just never came to be. So for now, it remains a blemish on the franchise, but with this YouTube series, I prefer to focus on as much of the positive side of EverQuest as possible. So here we sit, with a total of 14 games in the world of Norrath, a multitude of Norraths in the EverQuest franchise. Not included in this official count, but here are a few supplemental apps or other games that aren't official releases. In 2011, EverQuest II released a mobile companion app that allowed you to access your character information, in-game chat, and more right from your phone. And while it was a wonderful idea, it eventually was shut down in 2016. One of my favorite mobile apps in the EverQuest franchise was the EverQuest Worlds app that was released with the announcement of EverQuest Next. It had EverQuest and EverQuest II trivia, content that you can unlock and claim within both games, but my favorite aspect of the app were the mini-games, from a Candy Crush-style mineral match to a Keynote's defense game and more, but unfortunately with the cancellation of EverQuest Next, EverQuest Worlds was also shut down. And finally, I can't have a story about all games in the EverQuest franchise without mentioning one of the original that didn't go into our actual countdown, Gems. How can you pass the time camping that epic spawn or waiting on those Luckland portals to fire off? /Gems. And I promise you, if a 15th installment in the EverQuest universe comes to light, you can be sure that the EverQuest Show will be there to give you a full report. Guk has existed in some form in several games throughout the EverQuest franchise. Take a look. Now this is just a taste of the upcoming story and game reviews that I'll be telling over the next several episodes about the creation of EverQuest, how the game continues to survive, and what's on the horizon. You may have noticed that the news updates have been removed from the EverQuest Show episodes, and that's because we've launched This Week in EverQuest. These will be supplemental short videos with weekly news updates and breaking news and events info to give you more content to consume in between regular EverQuest Show episodes. But in order to know when those updates drop, you'll need to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to share, like, or subscribe. And if you have any comments, always post them in the comments section below. I love to hear what you guys have to say about what we've covered in each episode. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.
We gotta be the best we can be. And though sometimes we don't want to, still we gotta chase our dreams. Reach up and reach high, because we're gonna pull through and give it all we got, even though it can seem hard to catch and make it happen. But we can't start sliding, come on, and do what you gotta do to fight on. And so no matter what comes your way, nothing can ruin your daily